what we are doing here. MNM is actually Makkal Needhi Maiam, the People's Justice Front. And we are basically a centrist political party. And the association that we have, MNM Friends from the UK, is a close association with the party. We are not a political party ourselves, but we go by the centrist views and the policies that MNM has shaped, and they are looking to implement if they come into power, or once they come into power next year. And we want to be different. We are different from the current political system that we follow in the state of Tamil Nadu. And Kamal Hassan, our leader, he is very keen on that. Like, we want to go away from the corrupt practices. We want to reinvent Tamil Nadu, or reimagine Tamil Nadu, as he calls it. We are a very progressive state, no doubt about that. The parties that were in power, they have done plenty to make our state to be a progressive one. But then we are still being held back by the corrupt practices and a lot of ungodly happenings, like, in the state, in terms of abuse of power and so on. We want to make a change. We want to ensure, Tamil Nadu becomes the progressive state it was before, 2-3 decades back. And having said that, what we do as MNM Friends from the UK, and we also have friends joining from MNM North America, we have friends from France and from Australia as well joining this call. We are all together helping the party. We propagate the party policies. We also hold these kind of events where we want to bring visibility as to the best practices that is being followed across the globe. And experts like Marc, Prensky and Ravi and others, we want them to share their expertise. And this is a way for the industry experts and to come in and steer the party's policies. And this is a new way of doing it. All along, political parties, they will have their own think tank or strategists that are more aligned to the party ideology rather than with the welfare of the people at heart. So we are driving it from a different angle. We are coming in from the people's angle, and we want to make sure, we put out such experts, and we showcase what we can do better as a party. And this is why we are holding these kind of events. We have had literary people coming on our events. We have had sports people coming on. We had artists coming on our events. Last week, we had a CEO of a software company that was kind enough to join us as well. So this is a mix of events that we are holding. And today, we are going to talk about a pet topic of Marc, which is education reforms. He doesn't even call it reforms. He's calling it post-education. And he's taken a hammer to the 20th century education system. So it'll be wonderful to hear from Marc on what his thoughts are in terms of education and all the reforms that needs to happen. And this is significant because recently the government of India had released the National Education Policy 2020, wherein they want to reform. The main thing they have done in that education policy is they have allocated 6% of GDP, which is the highest in the history of government of India for education sector, which is a welcome move. But then there are a lot of aspects to the policies that go with that. We are not going to dive into those policies by itself, but we want to hear from Marc his view on how education should be dealt with, in the 21st century. And also, hopefully, he will pull in a few bits and pieces from the NEP 20, the National Education Policy, and talk about that. And we have our audience, as I said, from all over the country and all over the globe. And hopefully, there will be a few questions coming from them. And this event is going live on Facebook and also on YouTube of the party. So without much further ado, and I would like to hand over to Marc. And Ravi, anytime you want to pitch in and say something, please feel free to let us know, and then I will unmute you. Marc, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kenan. I am very pleased to be with you. What for me is the morning, for you is later in the day. Let me begin by saying that I love India. And I love India for lots of reasons. For one thing, you're so wonderfully culturally diverse. For another thing, you are the largest democracy in the world. There are many good reasons that to love India, and I think that you are poised to do very well if you do the right things in the coming years. That said, I don't know all that much about India. You have to say anything with a big caveat that says, I've only been there once. I was only in New Delhi and Hyderabad. I've never been to Tamil Nadu. I hope to come sometime. But I do know about a lot of things related to education. And I do know a fair amount about Indian kids because I have met them through Kiran Sethi's Design for Change organization. And I'm very proud of them. So I'm here to talk about education and maybe make a few comments on the national education policy as well. Many of you may know there's a very famous quote from Nelson Mandela, which says, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. A lot of people use that in their talks. I want to tell you that that was true in the 20th century, but it is no longer true in the 21st century. And this is a huge issue. What's true in the 21st century, where all our kids are going to live, is that the greatest weapons, the most powerful weapons we can use to change the world are empowerment and accomplishment. And that is really the crux of what I think needs to happen in India, in Tamil Nadu, and in fact, the whole world. And since we mentioned Nelson Mandela, let's mention an even more powerful freedom fighter, Gandhi, right? And Gandhi said, true education must correspond to the surrounding circumstances. And he is absolutely right. So we need to look at what those surrounding circumstances are now and in the future. And we're at a very big turning point, which I will illustrate at the very end with a slide. We are at a turning point just around the turn of the millennium, and we're in 2020, but roughly 2000 will be remembered for all of history because so many things happened that were important. I think there are three we should focus on. The first is, of course, technology. And we all know that technology is changing rapidly, that right around the turn of the millennium was the time when the internet started to reach billions of people. It's not coming everywhere equally. We all know that, but it is coming fast. The Starlink satellite network that Elon Musk is putting up is already up. And my sense is that if we don't think about tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but we think about 20 years from now, which is when the kids of today will be living their lives in the mid to late 21st century, all of them will likely have what we have today. Some will have more, but all of them will be connected at high speeds with some device that will help them, I think. That's technology, but that's not the only thing. And in fact, it's not enough. Because the other thing that is changing incredibly rapidly in our times is beliefs, is what we think. And beliefs are changing, mostly generationally, from generation to generation in huge numbers of areas. And the reason they're changing is because those people who grew up in the 20th century, which is almost all of us, anybody who's over 20 today grew up in the 20th century, those people are what I call the last pre-internet generation the world will ever know. That's us. The kids, of course, are the first internet generation the world has ever had, and all the other generations following them will be connected as well. So certainly one of the great infrastructure things that India and Tamil Nadu ought to do is connect everybody, make sure that everybody's connected. For me, that's priority number one. But how are beliefs changing? Well, beliefs are changing in terms of whether kids are powerful or not. In the 20th century, kids were not powerful. In the 21st century, they are. So they need to change their beliefs to say, I can. And the beliefs are changing, not just with regard to that, but with regard to technology and privacy and property and personal relationships and sexuality and security and power and kids and work and empathy and violence and God and religion and justice and money and love and government and even time and space. And this is not just me thinking this is anthropologists and sociologists thinking this as well. So the first internet generations are going to have different sets of beliefs. One of the great beliefs of the last pre-internet generation, that's us, is that education is the most important thing that we can do, because it was for us. And we all went through it and we all benefited from it. And it was terrific. And almost all of us want to pass it down to our kids, more or less the same way we got it, only better. And that has unfortunately changed, because what we need to pass down to our kids is not the 20th century education that we received, but a new way of thinking based on empowerment and accomplishment. So let me talk about education for a little bit. I read, it's long, so I read it quickly, the National Education Policy. And it's good. And you have 1 billion kids, or probably, well, you have 1 billion people, so you probably have, hundreds of millions of kids in India, and it's going to be a younger population. So you have a big issue, something big that has to be dealt with, and I can understand that it's very complex, and the policy runs more than 60 pages. It's full of the right buzzwords. In fact, if you look at page 1 alone, you will see 30 buzzwords, from achieving full human potential to building character, to being ethical and rational, to being discovery-oriented and learner-oriented. I could read them all, but you can see them all on page 1. And that's very nice. I admire that. But the entire policy, if you look at the whole thing, is really what I call icing to 20th century education. And when I say icing, that's an acronym: incremental changes. Incremental changes to 20th century education. We're going to move from a 10 and 2 system to a 5-3-3-4 system. We're going to do a whole lot of these incremental changes, and they're probably not bad in and of themselves, but they miss the key point in my view. And this is really what I want to bring to your attention. If you look for the word empowerment in that document, I saw it once, and it was not even in the same sense that I'm talking about. If you look for the word accomplishment, I don't think you'll find it at all in that document. So the two key things that are needed for the 21st century by all our kids, empowerment and accomplishment, are not in the national education policy. And therefore, it's really important that we start thinking about how to get some of that in. And maybe we can do it nationally, and maybe we can do it on a state basis, because you have a state. Now, here's something that's really interesting. When I got to page 60, way deep in the national education policy, suddenly there was a little section called 25.2, which you can look up. It's one sentence. And it says, we recommend that we redesignate the Ministry of Human Resource Development, which is what takes care of education at the national level today. We say you should redesignate that the Ministry of Education. Okay, buried deep, but it's there. That, to me, is really going backwards. I agree that you should redesignate the ministry. I think it should become the Ministry of Empowerment and Accomplishment. The Ministry of Empowerment and Accomplishment, ENA, if you will. And that should be for the state, and if that should be for the nation, and if the state, like Tamil Nadu, has a Department of Education, rename that the Department of Empowerment and Accomplishment. Why would you do that? Because then that's what you would focus on. That's what your job would be if you work for that department or that ministry. You would be to empower the youth and the people of India and to help them accomplish. And when I say accomplish, what I mean is projects that will make India better. So I can see, and I've recommended in one of my books, taking an entire year to say, we're not going to teach the old curriculum this year. What we're going to do is every kid in India, every kid in Tamil Nadu will do a project that makes some aspect of India better. And those projects will be chosen by the kids, not by the teachers or by anybody else, based on what the kids see as problems that they would like to fix. So some kids may do some projects that clean up places. Other kids may do projects that get rid of racism or corruption or other kinds of things. Some kids may put beggars to work, as I saw one project happening. I will share with you my favorite project from India, which is that a team put together and built a sandal that women can wear. And this sandal has a little device in it that can capture the energy when the woman walks around, so that it stores the energy in the sandal. And what it can do is, if by chance that woman gets accosted or attacked, she can just, with her toe, push a button and set off a really loud alarm. So that was invented by kids. And there are many, many, many more projects like that throughout India. I saw some of them when I was in New Delhi at the Festival of Innovation. What I saw was that some of these great projects were there. They'd been invented, but they hadn't been disseminated. And that, in a country of your size, is a very important piece of the puzzle. That you not only have to invent these things and create these things, but they have to be able to reach the people. So I am going to now show you a couple of slides to end up here, if I may, and they resume really what I've said. Let's see if, nope, that's leave meeting. I don't want to do that. I want to share screen. Okay, so I am really talking here about vision and hope. And I have a vision that I'm sharing with you, and I really hope that you take advantage of it. Tamil Nadu itself is bigger, I found out, than most European countries. The city of Chennai is bigger than the entire country, twice as big, we just found out, of the entire country of Finland. So you have this enormous opportunity. And I hope that parts don't block this. If they do, you can move them. But here's what I want to leave you with so you can use this. The first one is what I said before. Nelson Mandela's famous statement that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world, which people will tell you every minute because they do, was true in the 20th century. And it's no longer true in the 21st century. In the 21st century, empowerment and accomplishment are the most powerful weapons you can use to change the world. And the corollary of this is the SDG number 4, which is a lot of people cite as well, and certainly cited in the report, that everybody should have equitable access to high quality education and lifelong learning, really should be amended to say that people should have access to lifelong empowerment and lifelong to equitable empowerment and to lifelong accomplishment. What we have in 2020 is an enormous choice to make. We have to decide whether we are going to move backward to the past or whether we are going to move forward to the future. This is a very stark choice. The last pre-internet generation, almost all of our adults born and raised and who had their beliefs formed in the 20th century, want to go back to a 20th century education with incremental changes, icing, which means we keep the schools, we keep the courses, we keep the classes, and we keep thinking of our kids as powerless learners who have to spend years in school before they can accomplish anything. That is really, I think, what the national education policy is and does, despite all the buzzwords. The other alternative, and the one that I certainly recommend for Tamil Nadu and for the entire country and for the entire world, is to move our kids forward to the future. They are the first internet generation the world will ever know, and every generation that comes after them will have a more powerful internet. They need empowerment and accomplishment. They need not schools, but empowerment hubs or whatever we call them. They need not courses and classes, but projects with real world impact, with measurable positive impact on the world. And they need to think of themselves, and we need to think of them, not as powerless learners, but as imaginers and doers and dreamers. And if we do that, we will be so much better off. And if you want to talk about this more, I offer my email, marcprensky@gmail.com. You can write me. I'm happy to engage with anybody in the world who wants to learn more about these ideas. So that's it. That's what I have to say. The choices are clear. The choices are really, do we want to go backwards or do we want to go forwards with our kids? And we can make those choices, and people around the world are starting to define what that is, what those choices mean, how we can do this. The kids are, wherever we do this, like in Design for Change or other places in the world, are very, very enthusiastic about doing this. I think we can improve the infrastructure, which is really job number one. And then I think that we can redesignate the ministry or the department as the Department of Empowerment and Accomplishment, and we can go very far. And I really hope we can get to where the kids need to be. I offer my help in any way I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marc. That was wonderful. That was wonderful summation of where your head is in terms of how education should be going forward. And also thank you for pointing out a couple of things from the NEP policy itself. You talked about the buzzwords and what it contains and what it should ideally contain as well. Before we ask people for questions, I have our General Secretary for Propaganda, Mr. C.K. Kumaravel. He is a well-known entrepreneur from Chennai. He is here and he is our General Secretary. I invite him to share a few words. Please, C.K. sir.
So, thank you, Kannan. I think it's wonderful listening to Marc. Puts a very holistic perspective of what are the changes which is required. In fact, I am doing an interview tomorrow on the same subject. It's very highly useful, and I will use a lot of the empowerment and accomplishment. I think that's the keywords what I have learned today, and how to put it to practice. I think these thoughts are very, very useful and very timely. Thank you for Kannan and the team for organizing this. I will connect with Marc on the email what he has given and take some more tips from him too, so that I can take it forward in Tamil Nadu. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your being here.
Thank you, C.K. sir. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, the floor is open for questions, and as people get ready, if you can just do you have any questions, C.K. sir, before you if you're logging off or something?
No. I'm not logging off. I'm there. I'll just be there for the question answer.
Okay.
I'll be there.
Yeah. Do you have any questions you want to ask or?
No, not really. I think one of the question I would want to connect with him offline. That's about the two-language policy. What is his thoughts on specifically on the two-language, which has become a
three-language policy in this new thing. It's not a two-language; it's a three-language policy.
Yeah, it's a three-language. Yes, by this, but we are in Tamil Nadu. We are proposing two-language. So, what's your thought on that?
Okay. I think that languages is an enormously important thing. I think that it is changing very quickly, in that if I came to Tamil Nadu, I could probably get along in, I think the language is Tamil. Is that the local language? Because I have a smartphone. So my smartphone, whether it's today or maybe it will take a few years into the future, will be able to let me converse with you in Tamil. And I can say what I want to say in English, and you can hear it in Tamil. And that is already here. That exists in the world. So the idea of languages and multiple languages is very much in flux. It means one thing for the next 5 years, maybe, or the next few years, but it means something very different for 20 years from now, when our kids will be grown up and living. And I don't have an answer for you here because it's complicated, but I would love to help you think that through with that in mind.
We in Tamil Nadu think that learning one more skill is far more useful for you to improve in your life than one more language.
And if you can translate from every language to every language, then absolutely that is true. That in the past, we had to spend enormous amounts of time, because learning a language is not easy. If you didn't grow up with English and you have to learn English, you have to spend a lot of time doing that, or vice versa. If we can eliminate that time and still have the benefits, you're absolutely right. We can use that time for many other things.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a student here actually, Advika. She may, I mean, she's got a lot of views. So I don't know, Advika, do you have any poser for Marc? Please go ahead. Advika is in the UK, by the way.
Hi. I don't really have any questions. Just to like listen to
Advika, you need to speak more loudly or get closer to the mic. I don't hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. No, I don't really have any questions. I just wanted to join and listen to your thoughts on the empowerment and accomplishment because I'm still in the education system. I'm currently 15, so.
So I have a question for you. I have a son who is 15. So I know a little bit about that age, at least on the boys' side. And he goes to school, and currently he goes to school virtually because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And he really does not like that. He doesn't enjoy it. He doesn't enjoy the fact that he has to be there. He tries to turn it off, which they make it hard. And he would really spend much less of his time in school. What he does when he doesn't have to be in school is follow his big interests. And his big interests currently are aviation. He flies both on a simulator and in the air. And he loves music, so he's learning guitar. And when he comes to that, he applies himself incredibly and works really hard. So my question for you is, would you rather be spending your time doing what you think is important or doing what the schools think are important?
Well, I guess what I think is important, but at the same time, I don't think school's giving me the exposure to think like for my opinion on what's important. So I guess I would need that exposure from school to decide what I think is important in order to do that.
That permission, yes.
Yeah, because I obviously like if I think right, like if you think about it, a 10-year-old might think, I don't know, if they're into horse riding is important, but at the same time they would need that, like at least, that simple like education, right? But I think as I'm growing older, it's really about the exposure that you get that will then, allow you to form an opinion. So.
Well, thank you for that. What I advocate is not that you just make it all up and find out what you love and what your passions are. What I advocate is that each kid figure out, with the help of adults, what they care about in the world. What are the problems that you see in the world that are meaningful to you that you want to help solve? Second, what are your strengths? What are you good at, particularly that you can apply to solving those problems? And third, what do you love to do? Because when you're doing something you love to do, you're much more powerful and motivated. So I would like to see schools be a continuous series of projects that let you do those three things: work on problems you care about, using your strengths in teams, and doing things that you love. And so, yes, there are things you can get from school, but they're typically not the things that are in the curriculum.
Yeah, I do agree with that.
Okay, thank you, Advika. Thank you for joining and asking that. Next, we have Madhi Punaswamy from Canada. He's got a question for you, Marc.
How do you do, sir?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you very much for your session. It's very interesting. Sir, my question is any developed country now start implementing this model as a pilot project, so we can go as a reference and see how they are implementing it?
I think the answer to that is no. For an actual whole country, not even probably even a state. What this is emerging in the world in pockets. That's what's happening. But even more, and you should look at it, and I can, if you talk to me, we can look at the various examples. The best one in your country is Design for Change. And look at that carefully, connect with Kiran Sethi, and you will, I think, be well off. But here's another important point. The things are moving so fast that there's no such thing as best practices. There's nothing to copy. You have to invent. And what you invent for India, what you invent for Tamil Nadu, will be different than perhaps what they invent in Finland or anywhere else. And if you were to spend your time running around the world for the next year or so, and bringing back what other people do, by the time you do that, you will be out of date. And that's the important point. That's another example of ways we can waste our time, just like we talked about multiple languages. We need to invent. The needs are clear. The kids are clear. We just heard from one. And the transition from the last pre-internet generation to the first internet generation is going to be a difficult and painful one, but that's going to be full of invention, full of creativity, and full of positive innovation that moves us forward. So my encouragement is not, don't go around the world and look for places you can emulate, but really invent your own. And if Tamil Nadu becomes the place to emulate because you've done this there, that's wonderful. Just like Finland did. And then you'll have, hopefully if COVID is over, you'll have lots of people coming there to observe what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. It's very valid. Agree, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madi, sir, for your question. Next, I have Francois Gaston. He is calling in from France. He is heading our France Kamal Hassan Fans Association there. Francois, yeah, go ahead, please.
Bonjour, François.
So you speak French?
I speak French, but I think for this group, let's speak in English.
Yeah. So you have guessed my English is not that well because it used to be my second language. I have just one question regarding your education policy. Your education policy, as I understood, is based on only one single parameter, which is internet. I would like to know if it is enough, just because we have other methods like Montessori, etc. I would like to know the benefit of such methods.
You're cutting in and out a little bit, but I think I hear. The microphone is cutting in. But you said that I may have mistakenly said that internet is the one parameter. That is just a designator. It's just a way to say, it's a shorthand. I used to use digital natives and digital immigrants. I've changed that. But it's a shorthand for saying that before roughly the turn of the millennium, people thought one way. After the turn of the millennium, again in rough terms, people are starting to think in new ways. Part of the reason that's happening is because the technology has changed so much. It's not the only reason. It's partially because kids have started to see their power, and not all the power that kids have depends on technology. It depends on their really accomplishing projects that they feel like they could do this. So I see that as a big necessity. If you want to move kids to the future, they really do need to be on the internet. Now they can, because you don't need to know as much. You can access everything when you're on the internet. In the 20th century, you had to know a lot of stuff because it was very hard to look it up. You had to go to a library. You had to do many things. Now it's in your pocket. I have every book I have read in the last 20 years on my phone still that I can use as a reference whenever I want it. So it is a new world. And the internet is not everything, but it is a good symbol for how the new world is different from the old world.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you, Francois, for your question. Next, we have Prasanna from London. He's got a question. Prasanna, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for all your inputs. I have two questions, actually. To begin with, do we need a national education policy as one policy for the whole nation? The reason behind this question is state like Tamil Nadu, which is very progressive and who has achieved so much in education, higher education, and regardless of any metric that you try to quantify progression in the modern world, we would either be in the top 1, 2, or 3. So I think it's quite unfair to have an education policy that is aimed at the whole country, whereas the whole country it's an union. It's not really it's a kind of homogeneous liquid where everyone is like on par with others in terms of progression and not progression. Where we have done really well, some poor states like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, they're quite lagging. So it's quite unfair where we have progressed like plus 40 years ahead, and we kind of pull back saying that you need to be on par with someone just because they're lagging. It's quite unfair on us or any progressive state on that matter. So do we need one NEP is the first question. Second question is the behavior or the kind of the gist of how the government is behaving, the central government is behaving around the last 7.5 years they've been in power. So they are embarking on neoliberal policy, which is not really new to the world, as Richard Nixon or Margaret Thatcher did in this country. So the neoliberal market, thrives on labor market, which has got less rights and more contractually upright. For example, 0 hours contracts. So that's a classic example of a neoliberal, how they would like to operate in a neoliberal world. So do you think the 10+2 system, which has served a state like Tamil Nadu so well and so good across the 60 years, has been kind of sacrificed to suit the neoliberal policies of this government, which is kind of embarking on saying, if you say a kid who is going to a third standard has to write a public exam, and what if he fails? And if you assume he's from, even within Tamil Nadu, there are places where, it's very hard to reach a school. So let's say I trek 15 kilometers in a hilly station. I'm from a daily wager family. I have to worry about the food on my plate for the next time around. So if I come from an underprivileged, given that there is no social security fabric net as exists in the European countries, if you impose that this same kid who's living in a hilly area, who's underprivileged and who's extremely poor, has to compete with someone who's from Madras, for example, I was born and raised in Madras, so I was from a middle-class family. I didn't have to worry about food on my plate on any given point in time. So if me and him has to compete against the same exams, very diminished tools to compete in the same exams, how would that be fair to assess anyone?
Thank you for those questions. Part of this is political, and that I have to leave alone because I'm not well versed enough in the politics of India. But what you talk about should education policy be national or local is something that's very much in the forefront of my country. In my country, education policy is completely local. We have 23,000 school districts, each of which has complete control almost. We have some statewide curricula, but nothing at the national level. It's here in the U.S., it's a joke to be the Secretary of Education because you have no power. And so it's really a question of how we balance this. And it is partially a question of fairness and partially a question of localities knowing what's best for their kids. what I think is that what we want to do at a national level is to have all our kids empowered. So if all our kids are doing projects that they choose that are helping them improve India and that are helping them in the process learn the stuff that we used to learn by sitting through boring classes, then we can do that in many ways and in different places. And I hope that's why it's a totally different goal. We're not competing. We're not going to all be sitting for the same exams. We're not going to all be competing with each other for the same jobs. What we're going to be focusing on is the uniqueness of individuals and kids. And if we don't do that, the machines will take over. Because remember, anything that two people can do equally well will quickly be taken over by a machine, by automation. And we have AI coming, and we have all these things that are coming that are going to make a huge difference. To me, the only hedge against that is uniqueness, is that each person, each student, each kid figures out what he or she cares about, what he or she is good at uniquely, and what he or she loves to do. And that can be done separately, or it can be nationally. Either way, it doesn't matter, but that's more important than figuring out national versus local autonomy. What's really, to me, more important is figuring out the core of it all. It really goes back to that metaphor of the cake and the icing, that if you are keeping the same cake, it doesn't matter whether you're putting on this icing or that icing or the other icing, because the cake, in this case, those exams you mentioned that you all have to sit for competitively, that's the same. But if you change the cake, if you change what it means underneath to empower kids and for kids to accomplish in the world, and think that that's a better way of bringing up kids, and that's a huge change in perspective. I agree. If you do that, then the other question is perhaps less important.
Excellent. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Prasanna, for your question. Next, I have Tufil from Canada again. He's got a question. Go ahead, Tufil.
Thank you so much, Kannan, and thank you so much, Marc, for your session. So I just have quick questions for you, just 3 questions. I'm sorry for the length. So first question is, what is your take on the Montessori system of schooling, and how do you think technology could be imparted into it? Because Tamil Nadu has a very strong primary schooling system. And my second question is...
Well, I need to ask you one thing. What is your thought on the you used an adjective before system, and I wasn't clear.
Oh, well, I was like, I did my schooling under the Montessori method of schooling, right? So
okay, I don't know that term, so that's what I'm saying.
So Montessori is the method.
Okay, I do know that term. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry for the pronunciation. So what is your take on that, and how do you think how do you think technology can play more of an active role in that system? Because Tamil Nadu has a very strong primary schooling system, and our schooling system has really been a pioneer for the entire country. And my second question is, if you see the gross enrollment ratio, that is the people enrolling or student enrolling into higher education after completing your 12th grade, Tamil Nadu is the topper in that. We even top the US. We have almost 50% of student enrolling into higher education. But how do you think technology can play more of an active role in bringing or increasing this gross enrollment ratio? Because the new education policy of India is aiming to achieve the current goal, which Tamil Nadu has already achieved by the year 2040. So we are way far ahead than what the Indian government is having a vision of. And my third question is to you, using technology, how do you think you can, the Indian education system or any education system can create more of a job providers or entrepreneurs?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for those 3 questions. Let me try to address each one. The first one is, you just told me something very positive, which is that Tamil Nadu has a very good primary system. And what we're finding is that if you can extend that as much as possible to preschool, to start kids when they're 3 years old, that's a lot better even than that. There's a wonderful saying that the Jesuits have that says, give me a kid or give me a child for 7 years and I will show you the man. So that means that those first years are so important. And they're particularly important because that's when your belief system is formed. That's when your beliefs are formed. If you were told in those first 7 years that you're not powerful and you can't do anything and you won't be able to do anything until you're an adult and accomplish anything, that's what you'll believe. If in the first 7 years you're told, wow, you are really, let's do a project. You did that. That was wonderful. There are kindergarten projects all over India and the world where kids are accomplishing things. And so that makes you a very different kid. Now, in Montessori's case, first of all, she's admirable because she created something that the world thinks of as a different system. And that's what I would love to do with what we're doing. I would love to say, do you want to send your kid to school or do you want to send them to an empowerment hub? Right? That there's a real choice for parents and for politicians and kids. So Montessori did that to some extent. They are now in a very difficult time in many places because of technology, because they were very hands-on and they said you need to have these materials and you need to do this. And suddenly technology has changed a lot of that for people. You can do Lego. You don't have to do Lego in person. You can do it on the screen, as you may know, right? So they need to adapt, and they are in the process of doing that. Waldorf is exactly the same and exactly the same position. Higher ed is yet another issue, because higher ed, for the most part, only in certain instances does higher ed deliver what it promises. It delivers a degree if you go through it till the end. And that degree can be very important in life. But the people who measure whether people actually change as a result of higher ed, whether that higher ed is liberal arts or whether that higher ed is very vocational, they say there's not that much change. There's probably more in the vocational side because you have to learn very specifics. What I think is the most important point of higher education is that it's a huge sorting of people. And when we do education before higher ed, we do it locally. So where you go for schooling depends on where you grew up. And you are put together with all those other people who grew up where you grew up. And that may be good, it may be not good, but it's what it is. And sometimes they try to differentiate and sometimes they don't. When we have higher education, we sort people by peer group. And that is a totally different thing. We say, okay, you apply to these places, and we say, you are part of the peer group in India Institute of Technology. You are part of the peer group in whatever your different schools are. In some ways, that's enough. In some ways, just knowing that you are part of that peer group affects your whole life. It affects you. It affects how people think of you. If I tell somebody I got into Harvard, it's equally good as saying I went to Harvard. It really doesn't matter that much, although it matters some, and it depends very much on the institution, on the people. But I think we have an enormous opportunity at the higher education level to focus on the sort, to say it's the admissions people who really do the heavy lifting here. They decide who belongs with whom, who's part of what group and what cohort. And those being part of the cohort that are peers is very helpful to people. Some people might say it's discriminatory, but it's chosen. It's not caste-based. It's not birth-based. There's flexibility there. So it takes away the locality and it puts it into the idea of choice. And so that's really where I would like to see higher education go. And I don't know anybody else who's talking about that. The third piece, you talked about technology and jobs. I would love to see technology developed by anyone, and this is starting in some places, that allows a kid, a young person, every year, not once, but every year, say on their birthday, to go through some kind of a program or game or whatever it is that they spend a little time with. And the game tells them at the end of that, it says, okay, given what you've told me, given what you've done, given what I've measured, this is a suggestion of things that you might look at. This is the profile, in some sense, that we've identified for you. And for me, for example, I'll give you a good example. For me, I took an instrument when I was in my 30s. It's called Herman Brain Scan. And it said, I just answered a bunch of questions, and it said, came back and it said, with your profile, which is very, on one side, very analytical, on another side, very creative, people with that profile tend to go into R&D, research and development. Well, I had never heard anybody ever say to me those words, R&D. And the minute I heard them, I said, wow, yeah, that's what I do. I'd love to be in that kind of a field. So we talk about exposure, but we don't do exposure. Exposure is very local and dependent. It depends on who your parents were. It depends on who your teachers happen to be. Most kids don't get exposed to very much in the world because there's so many millions of things to be exposed to. So the better approach for me is to start with a kid, is to say, who are you at this moment? And it could change over time. Who are you? And given that you are that unique person, here are some suggestions about what you might look like that would fit well with you. That's where I'd like to go. And if anybody wants to develop that, they have my help and blessing.
Great. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Tufel, for your question. Next, we have Rouvier from France. He's got a question for you, Marc.
Good evening, sir. I'm from France. I'm very glad to see you in the screen of MNM. Thank you to MNM Nanbargal Kuju. Sir, I have a question, whether it is related to or not. It is about the new education policy of India. Yes. There are a lot of parts and articles they are going to implement. Particularly, they are insisting on an old system. It is called as Kulathozhil. That means family profession. They want to teach the students the family professions. They are going to implement it in the future. According to your view, that means you are foreigner, so you are seeing this view. I think you understand what is a family profession. Some family has a profession. It will be passed over to the next generation. According to a foreigner, as a foreigner, what is your view about this implementation in future? Can you answer or?
I can certainly take a stab. I answer everything. The idea of professions being passed down within a family is a very old one. It was really before school, that was what happened. I call that the accomplishment tradition of education. And it was done through families, it was done through apprenticeships, It was done through sending your kid to the church. It was done through many ways that we had to do this. But if your family was a baker, your first choice was to be a baker. And that's okay if you're okay with it. If you say, well, okay, I'll just be a baker like my father or whatever, or a doctor like my father, that or an engineer, that's fine. But if you don't want that, then you're going to be a miserable person for the rest of your life. And so I come from a country where there is much more flexibility, maybe more than anywhere. And that's one of the wonderful things about the US, is that you really get to choose. And even once you've started something, I have changed careers several times. Nobody says anything wrong if you decide to reinvent yourself and change your career. So I see the value in wanting to prolong the family professions. I think there needs to be it needs to be clear that it's one of several options, and for some kids it's really the best option, and it's the best option if they don't know about anything else, or if they really like what their family does, or if they've already been doing it, then it can be a great option, and it should be offered to everybody. Lots of kids whose fathers are doctors or lawyers, or now mothers are fathers or are doctors or lawyers, go into that because they see, oh, they had a pretty good life or whatever, and they hate it. They hate it. We have doctors and lawyers out there and engineers who hate it. They want to be something else. And they should, in my view, have that opportunity to be something else. But it's not, but what is really important for me is that they all have equal value, that there's not more value in being an engineer than being a wonderful bread maker or a wonderful doctor or a wonderful anything. That the trick is to become world class in whatever it is you do. That's really what I would make as my goal. If your family does baking or jewelry making or whatever, any profession at all, and you go into it, become the best at it. That's great. And then you will be just as valuable as the best doctor or lawyer or engineer or anything else. If not, then it doesn't matter. But that's what I think the government should encourage.
Great. I mean, the question that Monsieur Rouvier asked you has got some connotations when he talks about family profession, especially in Tamil Nadu, of course, also in India. Is that because it was a forced measure, or at least it was seen as a forced measure, that you come from a line of bakers, that's all you should do. You come from a line of farmers, that's all you should do. So the society...
That's very similar to some things that they have done that I've heard about in China. So they go out and they say, they find a very young kid and they say, you have a talent for ping pong, right? So you will now go to a special place and we will develop only your ping pong side so that you can be an Olympic ping pong player and to the glory of China. And boy, for a few of them, that might be great, but for a lot of them, it might be really terrible. So yeah. I am much more for choice.
Okay. No, fair enough. Because you brought the sports example, I would like to bring out Yao Ming, because he was born to parents that were basketball players and they were very tall. So they thought because he's going to be tall, he should play basketball. And, he ended up in the NBA.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. Some people, there are lots of tall people that I've met where I would say, are you a basketball player? And they say, no, I don't want to play basketball. I'm tall. That's what I am. And, that should be fine. And we've also learned from, you may be aware of a guy named Steph Curry, who happens to be around where I live, who's not the tallest guy, but who said to himself, I am going to be the best three-point shooter the game has ever seen.
Yeah.
And he worked and he worked and he worked and he is.
Yes.
So it really, what you want to do, what your passion is, and how you apply that passion. And that's the key. I don't talk about passion. I talk about applied passion.
Yeah.
How you apply that passion and the skills and gifts that you have and your interests, that's what counts. And you should have a say in that, in my view.
Absolutely. Just one more observation before I give it to Balamurugan from Chennai for the next question. You talked about being world class, no matter what your chosen profession is, you should be considered as equal to engineers and doctors and lawyers. Our leader, Kamal Hassan, his famous quote is, his mother told him, "I don't care what you do in life." He was a school dropout. She told him, "Even if you become a toilet cleaner, I want you to be the best in that, so you should maintain the toilet is the best, most cleanest toilet in the world." So I mean, that's
what I'm talking about. And guess what? You could invent better ways. You could be creative. You could be inventive. You could be, and I've been in taxi cabs that were beautiful taxi cabs where the driver was really, really trying, and he had this place to hang your coat and this place to do this, and other places where they don't try. It's really, you really can put forth the effort to be the best at what you wanted. And imagine if that happened, say, in Tamil Nadu. And Tamil Nadu got the reputation in the world of saying everybody from Tamil Nadu is really working hard to be world-class at whatever it is they do. Wouldn't that be a great reputation to have?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Balamurugan, sorry, it's your turn. Balamurugan is from Chennai. Go ahead.
For me, it's the morning. I've got all the time in the world.
Thank you so much, Marc. I am Balamurugan from Chennai. I have two questions for you. First one is India, particularly developing countries like India, and in particular in Tamil Nadu, we have started on online education systems due to corona pandemic. So how do you think about that it would be suitable for the developing countries like India, that online education, because we don't have a infrastructure like that parents to buy a mobile phone or laptop for their children. So how it would be possible or suitable for the parents to get on the online education for their children? This is my first question. And the second question is, according to the education policy, that school-going children for the 3rd standard, 5th standard, and 8th standard children, they are going to write a public examination, that is public assessment. Do you think that 3rd standard student can write a public assessment, that is public exam? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, the first question is easier. My view is that the first priority of government in the 21st century is to make sure that everybody is connected, that they have a fast connection, whether it takes a satellite, whether it takes kids digging ditches to lay cable. I don't care what it is. Every kid needs to be connected, and every kid needs some kind of a device that is modern and powerful. And Bill Gates points out that we have more cell phones in the world than we have toilets. And that is, that's too bad. We don't have as many smartphones yet as we have cell phones. And yet, I would bet that some people on this call have a drawer full of old smartphones because they've upgraded. And so these things, and now when you turn one in, it becomes refurbished, and the prices are coming incredibly down incredibly fast. So it's not an unattainable goal to say that within the next 5 years, say, we would like in Tamil Nadu to have fast internet available to everybody, and everybody to have the equivalent of a 2020 smartphone. I mean, there will always be better technology. There will always be the latest that will go to the people who can afford it. But everybody needs to have what is becoming the basics. So to me, that's number one. Now, when you have that, what do you do with it? Is the next important question. And my view is that if what we do with it is just the old 20th century education, if what we do is have math classes and science classes and arts classes and social studies classes and MOOCs and we do this stuff online and we do them all online, we're going to get nowhere. For two reasons. One, those things are no longer as needed as they were in the 20th century for most people, and for some maybe. And two, putting that stuff online and doing it is incredibly boring. And that's what my son is going through right now. So we need to invent, as we connect the people, which we have to do, we also need to invent ways to use the technology to do the kinds of things that they need, to empower them, to make them accomplish projects, and to let them become the people that they want to become, whether it's their family profession or whether it's some other profession. That needs to be invented. That doesn't exist today. You can't go to Finland and find it and bring it home. And so you guys are at the top of India by everything that Kannan says in many ways. And I really hope you will invent these things. Now, your second question is harder for me to answer. Can kids take public exams at some particular age? I think that kids have so much more power than we give them credit for at every age. But that doesn't mean that we've put into their heads the kinds of things that it takes to succeed on an exam, because exams are very, very specific in the kinds of things that they require. And they do require you to sit in class and put stuff into your head. We talked about teaching to the test, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure whether we want to do that. I don't think we do. But we can certainly assess kids at every age. And the way we need to assess them, in my view, is can they do projects that have measurable positive impact on their world? And there are plenty of examples of little kids, 6-year-olds doing this. In one, there's a really nice video from Spain where the kids couldn't reach the waste baskets in the streets. And they designed lower waste baskets. They went to the mayor. They lobbied for this stuff, and they got lower waste baskets. And then they celebrated, and they were very happy. And what that shows them is that they're powerful, that they saw a problem, they did a project, put together a team, and fixed that problem. Kids can do that at any age. And that's what I think that we need to do and continuously measure.
Okay, no, thank you. Actually, Bhargavi from Bangalore, she had a question, I think, but you addressed something similar. She was asking about the stress levels of children age 6 and 7 taking these public exams, like, how they can cope, like, mental stress and all that. I think that's what you just addressed.
I mean, that's really important because stress levels are very high. And we now have a world that has a lot more people than it did when I grew up. I grew up in a 2 billion person world. Now we're in an 8 billion person world. That's 4 times bigger. So if that world becomes totally competitive, the stress levels are going to go through the roof, and they are in many places. I come from a place in California where literally at one point kids were throwing themselves under trains, and they had to station guards there. That's how sad it got. But the way to get rid of the stress is just to say, listen, you are an individual, you have strengths, you have interests, you have desires, you have loves. Do those things, but do them well. become world class. And if you're doing something that you love, that you've chosen, that you have agency over, you're going to be a lot less stressed. It doesn't mean you won't have to work as hard. You may even work harder. You know, some of the best actors in the world, some of the best dancers in the world, some of the best doctors in the world or engineers work very, very hard, but they do it out of love. And when they do it out of love, they're not as stressed. There's stresses from time to time, but overall, they're not as stressed. And I think the same applies to our kids.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I was having a discussion with my wife, like, on the weekend, and we were talking about education. We got 3 young boys. And then because of the COVID situation, they're all at home. They haven't been to school for 6 months close to. And now the question is, should we send them back to school or not? And then she was saying, what are they learning? Why should they go to school to learn math? Why should they go to school to learn English or even sciences? They should go to school. They should learn all these things from home, basically homeschool, but then they should go to school just to socialize, just to play around. What do you think about that? Something like that.
Well, my son told me that he misses 2 things about school because he hasn't been in person school for a while now. He misses his friends and being with them in person. Now, he does socialize with some of them. He goes riding his bike with a few of them, and every single day he is in constant contact with them online through texting and through game playing and other things. The second thing he said he missed was the end of the day, the final bell. School was over. That was such a good feeling for him. And he volunteered that. I didn't even ask that. He said, I miss that. I miss the idea of being liberated from school. So it varies by kid. It varies by family. It varies, there are kids who really need to escape from their families. There's no question about that the families are not as good or as supportive as they might be, or they might be too numerous, or they might be, there's so many reasons why that could happen. And for those kids, it's good to get out of the house sometimes and be in school. So I really think it's individual. But if the kid is staying home, like your kids, you said you're trying to decide, if they do stay home, what I think is most important is not that they keep doing the schoolwork and keeping up with the schoolwork. What I think is that's okay. And I tell my kid, play school, learn to play school because it's important. But what really counts is to take the opportunity to say, okay, who are you kids? What do you care about? What are you good at? What do you love? Okay, now let's think about a project you might do and put a team you might put together to do that project. So it's just really amazing to me. When I was in India, and I've seen this also in other places, you can go to a place in India that is beautiful, where it's a neighborhood that is equally beautiful, whether it's high rise or low rise, to any neighborhood in the world. But what will often happen in India is that very close to that will be a swamp, will be a polluted swamp. And you can tell me if this is true or not. I saw it in several places. Well, why aren't we cleaning up that swamp? Why aren't the kids spending at least part of their time fixing that problem? And whether it's that or something else, or it could be a lot of things, but it really is something. And I saw that there was an initiative from Modi about let's clean up India, right? That you all know about that. And yeah, but who's going to do it? The kids should be doing it as part of what they do. And then if they do that, they won't let anybody else make it dirty again because they cleaned it up. And if they see an adult throwing something away, they'll say, no, that we just cleaned that up. And we're going to keep it clean for the rest of our lives. So this goes back to the beliefs that the kids can't do it, that only the adults can do it. And it's not true. The kids can do enormous amounts if we just let them and we say, do what you want to do, not what we tell you to do, but do what you want to do. Just make things better.
Yeah.
That's my perspective.
Yeah. That cleaning the swamp thing, that's got like some ugly social connotations within the Indian context. Because
yes, I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
But here, let me tell you very specifically.
Yeah.
There was a woman, an Indian woman, who won the top science prize in one of the competitions. And she won it because she made a something that helped identify what the pollutants were in water. So you can, when you know what's polluting it, you can clean it up more easily. And her great frustration was that nothing happened with that. Nothing. It was just a nice innovation. And she got prize for it from whoever, Cisco or Intel or Microsoft or whatever. But nothing happened. So maybe the words are not the right words. And I apologize if I offended anybody with those words. But the idea of taking the innovation that, or the thought or the creativity of the kids and literally applying it to the problems that you see next door to you in your life, in your community, in your state, in your country. That idea is something that we don't do today, that we really could do, and that I think would be enormously powerful.
Yeah. The thing that I don't know whether we touched upon that. This cleaning the swamp is more to the social divide. Like, if you're on the upper side of the social divide, then the parents look down. You're asking, I send my children to study in your school, you're asking to clean the swamp. Or if it's on the lower side, then you got the other class of people, saying, oh, you look at how you treat the upper caste is treating the lower caste in a bad way. So in India, both sides, there is an issue with what you're saying. I have a couple other questions. There is one question from Rouvier. He's asking, what is the role of a teacher in modern education system compared to the older form of education? And then I also have one from Bhargavi Natarajan from Bangalore. She's asked, there is an history in India where it has produced, ancient universities, great education system, astronauts, surgeons, and so on and so forth. And there have been Nobel Prize winners as well. But then we are still lagging behind in some ways compared to the US or UK or any other Western nation. And then there is also a fear that the education is becoming more and more commercial and business activity in India. So your views on those two, please.
Okay. Well, the teacher one is a little bit complicated. I think that I hope, and I think you can say with some certainty, that teachers go into teaching because they want to help kids, and that really is the motivation that teachers have. What happens is that they are put into a system where they are told, you have to do this. You have to cover this curriculum. You have to do this pedagogy. You have to do this. And in my country, I'm not going to speak for India, but they are told in no uncertain terms, that's what you have to do. This is the textbook. You cover it. You go through it. You do this. And what that does is really hampers them. It really puts them in a very tight box of a profession where they can't do what they think is right. If they see something that they want to do for somebody that isn't in the curriculum, they have a hard time doing that. So what I think is we really want to build something side by side. We really want to build something where if you're a teacher who really wants to help kids, or you're a person who wants to help kids, and you don't have to be a teacher by profession. You could be a doctor, you could be an engineer, you could be anything. And you want to help kids, you can go to an empowerment hub and help kids. And then the kids will come and they'll sign up for the projects that they want to do. And so we could expand our teacher corps to everybody. that would be a wonderful thing. And we can say, no, it's not just those people who have signed up to teach the curriculum, but everybody is a teacher. And if we did that, I think that would be a wonderful thing. It's a totally, what I'm talking about is just a different profession in a sense. Helping kids, being what I call an empowerer, an enabler, and a guide for kids doing projects is not what the world calls being a teacher. What the world calls being a teacher is standing up in front of a class and delivering a curriculum. Those people have a very hard job in the 21st century because the curriculum is mostly out of date. The kids don't really want it. It's very tough for them. I feel for them. I would love to give them all an opportunity to move to doing something better, and to say, sure, if you don't like what you're doing in the schools as a teacher, do it in the hubs, and you can do it differently. So I think teachers are very noble in that they've chosen to help kids. I think that they are in a time when what is asked of them is no longer appropriate, and that huge numbers of them are frustrated because they already realize that. So that's teachers. Remind me of the second question.
It's about witnessing education becoming a more of a social, commercial activity and all that.
It's very interesting because I think, and I'm now writing about this, you have to distinguish between education with a small e and education with a capital E. Education with a small e, everybody wants. Everybody thinks it's beautiful. It's Socrates, it's Gandhi, it's anybody. We all have our ideals in our head. It's an ideal. It's not a thing. It's an ideal. Some people think it should have STEM. Some people think STEAM. Some people think art. Some people that the small e education is an ideal, and it's going to be different for every single kid. It really, and if you're lucky, you get one that helps you. But the big E education, the capital E education, is the system. And the question is, what should the system do? That is what we're talking about in the national education policy and all that. Should the system be a vocational system? Should it just prepare kids for jobs? And in some places, that's what's done. Should it be a philosophical system? So it does what the top universities say, light and truth, and you read all the classics and you think big thoughts. Should it be in between? We don't know those kind of things, but we do know but I think you can get around all of that stuff by asking the question differently. It should be what every kid needs individually. And we should have it set up in a way that it can be individual for every kid. So there are kids who really will thrive on the classic Indian thinkers and writers that are talked about in the national education policy, and not just Indian ones, but the Western ones. And they some of them will become college professors, and that's great. Academics have always existed. We always need them. Not everybody is going to be an academic. In fact, probably 95% or more of the people in the world won't. What do they need? Well, they need to be aware of certain things like government, the forms of government we have, and a few other things, not that much. And then they have to know what they're doing in whatever it is that they do. So to me, the answer to that question is not you pick liberal arts or you pick vocational. The answer is you pick individuality. And the new part of the world, the difference in the world in the 21st century, is that we can do that. We couldn't do it in the 20th century and before. We had to sit a lot of kids down in one place financially and in terms of the pedagogy, and we gave them all the same curriculum. That was what we had to do before, and that's still carrying over into the 21st century. But it's not the best we can do. The best we can do, and if you want to be the leaders in the world in Tamil Nadu, which I hope, because that's what this whole idea is about, you will figure out ways to literally create a different education for every kid in function of who that kid is, what they care about, what they're good at, what they love to do. And if you do that, you'll get enough engineers, you'll get enough doctors, you'll get enough professors, but you'll also get everything else because people are so varied. So that's my perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, Marc, for that. There is a question from Satish, or maybe a last one for you. I will unmute Satish. He can ask it himself. Go ahead, Satish.
Hi, Marc. Good morning, where you are. Firstly, I'm sorry, I joined a little late, so I'm not sure if you have addressed this previously during this conversation. I have a question on scalability, right? Any great suggestion or system, and I'm talking with some exposure, not a great deal of exposure on various systems of education, like Rudolf Steiner's way of education, or Montessori even, or even J. Krishnamurthy's school of education, in right now Isha Foundation in Coimbatore, which also seem to have a very nuanced and quite a holistic view of what education is, and catering to, as you rightly say, the individuals that live within each child, right? Yet none of them, right from the 18th century or 19th century experimentation on these educational new schools of education, haven't really scaled, have they? So is there an inherent limitation in this personalized, individualized way of education that resists it from scaling? And the other side of the same coin is the way of looking at such an attentive education itself too idealistic?
I have a perspective on scaling. I come from, or I live in now, Silicon Valley. Everybody wants to scale everything. You build something big, you make $1 billion, and scaling is talked about all the time. It's not something we need in education. We don't need to scale education, we need to individualize education. And so scaling means doing the same thing for everybody. So if everybody in the world had Krishnamurti, or had Waldorf, or had Montessori, that would not be good. That would not be good. And if people want to do a certain amount of things and it gets to a certain size and people do it all over the world, okay, that's okay. I have no problem with that. But we're not in that world anymore. We're not in the world where you have to build something called a car, a Model T, and it has to go to everybody. That's the world of the 20th century. We did that. Now everybody in the world drives a car that looks pretty much like the next one. We did that with education. If you go to any country in the world, they will have an education system that starts with literacy and numeracy and then moves into what I call the mess: math, English, science, social studies, right? And this is worldwide. This is scaled. This is totally scaled all over the world. And that is not a good thing. It turns out that that's a bad thing, because there are no alternatives, and yet everybody is an individual. So I would say, my view when people talk about scale is, I say, no, it's not what we want. It's not that we want one person, whether she or he is from India or anywhere else, and you guys are taking over in Silicon Valley. I know that. We don't want you to invent the one system that's going to scale to the world. That's really wrong, in my view. We want to invent a process by which everybody gets to be an individual. And if you want to say that that process scales, that process is doing project after project after project. If you want to say, well, you know, it happens well through empowerment hubs, so we can have different empowerment hubs in every country alongside schools, that's okay. But as soon as you make them the same everywhere, you're in trouble. So somebody, give you an example. I recently met and talked to and even did a keynote for a group called Thinking Huts. And they, very clever young lady who said, we can 3D print schools. I mean, why should we not have schools? We now have the big machines that can literally 3D print with concrete, right? You've probably heard of these things. And so they had made a little design, and it takes 2 days to print this little round building with a few windows and doors. And they're doing it in some country. They found a company that they hooked up with, and they're doing it in some country. Madagascar, I think, is where they're starting. And I say, well, first of all, it's a great idea that we can build a school in 2 days. Okay. And you don't have to buy the thing in the country. We can fly in the machines. So, but what's really exciting about that is that any person can now design and build a school. So 3D printing is done with computer-aided design. You go to a program, you design the program, and then that goes into the CAD program, and then that goes into the 3D printing program. And so your school doesn't have to look like anybody else's school in the world that you design. And guess what? If you're a smart kid or a capable kid, you could do that at age, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's the power that I see. It's not, I don't want a world that scales where everything's the same. I think that's part of the sad part of the world that we have now. Everybody in blue jeans and everybody we have the uniculture. I like multiple cultures. And scale leads to uniculture, in my view. It doesn't have, the cars are differentiated a little bit, but not really that much. Not really that much. You just only at by how much you pay for them are they slightly differentiated. So let's think differently than scale. Let's think individuality. And can we scale individuality? Can we do that so that everybody gets to become what they want to become? And the world, and everybody improves the world the way they want to improve the world. And if they want to come together in larger groups that we now call companies or organizations, great. They should do that. Because that, when you have those shared beliefs and you form something like that, you get more done.
May I have a follow-up question, please, Kannan? Is that all right?
But of course.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, and it sounds brilliant what you say, right? And yet, I want to know, in this world where different skills are valued differently, I have studied theater, which today is 0 jobs in the market as it is right now. There are no theaters that are open at the moment, and the jobs are completely dried up. And the fallback option to a kid who probably did not do well in school in India right now is to go to a city and become a taxi driver, which is a dead-end job. And his only dream is to live in that car, make as much money as he can, go back to his village, and probably do a bit of farming, maybe buy a tractor to make a little bit more money, right? In this real world, how, with what certainty can we say, do what you love, right? Go ahead and learn how to paint. Yet you can't be guaranteed a livelihood. What is that? What is this complex that we are dealing with?
I don't say just do what you like. I say apply what you like to helping a problem in the world. So I know of theater groups that do this very confrontational. I saw one not too long ago that scared me to death because it seemed like they were these real people having these real conflicts, and it really showed me what goes on in these families. And yet they were actors doing this kind of stuff. There are when people say you've got to prepare for the jobs of the future and they're all going to be different and 50% of them will be gone, I say there may not even be jobs in the future. We may support ourselves in a different way. The government we may have universal basic income. We may have, what there will be is projects, things that we want to do. And those things are not just for you, they have to be related to the world. So if you're going to have any be used to India as an actor, or London, or wherever you want to be, you have to do something that somebody said, wow, that was great, I'll pay for it, right? And that may have once been, I'll put on Shakespeare. And it may be today, I'll do something very different. And, comedy is thriving. People are earning money. Many actors are earning money by doing webinars that my son subscribes, and they get money, and bing bing on the screen, another guy contributed. There are new ways to earn a living, and they really depend on the creativity of the people who are doing it, and they really depend on understanding that the 21st century is not the 20th century. So acting meant one thing in the 20th century, and you'd get, jobs, and you'd audition, and you'd do all those things. I was once trying to be an actor, and it's tough. It meant if you were lucky, you got to be part of a troupe, you got to have a more or less steady income, but I got into one Broadway show, but it lasted 2 weeks, right? So that was in the 20th century. Now, all those people, some of them are still trying to do what went on in the past because it still exists. But the smart ones are inventing new ways to do it. The smart ones are saying, well, since if fewer people are going to the theater, or they can't, or it's impossible because of COVID, I will do theater online in my own way. And they invent that stuff. So that, to me, it's totally realistic. Not only is it totally realistic, it's what needs to happen. If you don't do that, you will be left behind. If you bemoan that what existed in the 20th century doesn't exist now, you will. And I think it was, and let me close, because it's been long, but let me close with Gandhi again. And I think I read this. I was searching for his quotes last night. And I think he said, we're all slogging up the same mountain. And we have to slog up that mountain. And you can complain that your feet hurt, or you can sing a song. And I prefer to sing the song, right? And so, again, we're all moving into the 21st century. It's not going to be the 20th century. It's not going to be the same. We are from the 20th century. I am from it deeply. I was born in 1945. You were from it probably less time, but you were formed in the 20th century. And if you want to continue your life based on what you learned and believed and was true in the 20th century, that is your privilege, but it will not help you. What will help you is to say, okay, I live and my children will live in this new time. What does this new time involve? What are the things that it affords that the old times didn't afford? And how can I use that to support myself and my family? What are the problems that are now in the world that I can help address? What am I good at? And what do I love to do? That's really what we need to think about.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Satish, for your question. Like, just one observation on that scalability thing that you mentioned. When you talk about scalability, you said you don't want everything looking the same, but then India as a society, the government, the political bit, it's going towards the Unitarian concept, where we should all speak the same language, we should all be the same kind of thing, which is really ridiculous. Given the diversity that India is, the rich culture and traditions and all that, it's like, someone wants to come in and blow everything away and say, we are all one. Yeah, we are all one as a union, but then we all have our distinct characteristics and, traditions.
Yeah. And I grew up, one of the biggest influences on me was science fiction when I grew up, Isaac Asimov and those people. And what was going on is that we were all Earthlings. And sometimes we had to fight people from other planets who were not Earthlings. And so I think it's really important that we retain cultures, and they're all very nice and they're good, but that we all think of ourselves as Earthlings. And because we are really in that boat, we are now dealing with problems like climate change that are Earth-wide problems. And if we don't do that, and if we start asking, well, how does this religion deal with climate change, and how does this culture deal with climate change, and at that level, we can't do that anymore. A fun film to see that I enjoy is Around the World in 80 Days. Because when Phileas Fogg went around the world in 80 days, it was incredibly different. When he went to India, it was different. And there he is in his top hat going around the world. And they I think, did a nice job of showing how different it was, although it might be, the exaggeration. But now it's a little bit different, and it's a fight. And I once heard a lovely speech. It's a fight between the small culture and the big culture and the uniculture. And it's not so much a fight, it's a balance. And we're all searching for that balance. Kids particularly, now there's a new balance because the technology introduces yet a new dimension. So what does technology mean in the small culture? What does technology mean in the uniculture, right? So these are the questions that we now have to deal with. These are the questions for our kids. And the fact that school is not about asking those questions is the huge mistake that I think we're making.
Yeah. No, thank you, Marc. We are close to the 2-hour mark, so I'm going to hand over to Francois Gaston from France to close the call. Francois.
Thank you very much, Marc, for your precious time. We had a nice session, and I take this opportunity to thank all the participants, especially Mr. CKK from Chennai, our General Secretary, and our two from head office, Sajish and Vinod, and Kannan for giving us this opportunity to interact with you. And thank you very much. And we hope to have more sessions like this. And see you soon. Good morning, actually. So it's too early for you in the US. So good.
It's my
have
pleasure.
A nice Sunday.
It's my pleasure. Merci beaucoup. And namaste, whatever I need to say in India for goodbye. And do you say namaste for goodbye?
We say vanakkam.
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 Oh, so vanakkam to everybody. I really think these ideas are important, and I'm happy to share them in any groups that people have that they want to do this with. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Canon. I appreciate everything, and you all have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.